Glad it wasn't a slog.
No, no, it was not.
Un- Unlike the First World War.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I call a transition.
Oh
So,
yeah,
so 1917. It's kind of funny. We usually go for like a classic movie and a new movie.
yeah.
I think this is the shortest gap between our classic and new movies we've had since 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
But I believe this was your suggestion, Daniel.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch this movie for a while, because number one, like I've seen like a lot of movies about World War II, but very few about World War One, and I'll admit that I really don't know much about World War One, at least the nitty gritty of it. I mean, I get like I get what the battle tactics and everything, but like if you ask me like a specific battle from World War One, like I couldn't tell you. Unlike World War Two, where like I mean I could tell you all about the Battle of the Bulge or the invasion of Normandy and all that, but or like Iwo Jima and
Right.
yeah, but World War One is a different story because I really beyond like what was going on, like I said, like with the trench warfare and then of course like the aftermath of World War One, which is basically the catalyst of World War Two, because if
Right.
you ask a certain former mustache leader of Germany,
Well, we know that the World Wars were a bit like the Terminator franchise in the sense that
yeah,
in the sense that the first one isn't as good as the second one, so everyone always just talks about the second one, and we don't really need a third one.
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Two was enough.
But yeah, I'm in a similar boat. But part of it is just that World War One is kind of monotonous and samey in the sense that
Mhm.
since it was just pushing back and forth over the same stretch of country, whereas and sure there were some fights in the colonies in Africa and Asia and whatnot, but not
Yeah,
anything near that level. Just because Germany wasn't a colonial power on the same scale as England and France.
right, yeah.
Uh, and so most of the battles of the World War One are a series of catastrophes like Gallipoli
Mhm.
or pushing back and forth across the same stretches of Belgium and France.
Yeah.
So
If
it
yeah.
doesn't lend itself as much to exciting stories.
Right. Yeah. It literally was a war of inches. I mean, they're fighting each other over like just like a few inches and a few feet of land every time, and it was. Yeah, I can imagine trying to fight a war like that, and like, okay, well, how are we gonna win this thing? It's just like we can't go more than a few feet before our men get slaughtered. It's just. Uh,
Right. Uh, and I want to say that they had just mined the hell out of the North Sea, which is why my immediate post World War One combined arms brain is going, why weren't you landing in Hanover or something
right.
to
Yeah.
try to get behind it? But
Mm,
that's neither here nor there. So the movie itself is a much more it's much more ground level, uh, like an awful day in the life of a couple of soldiers.
yeah. Yeah. And good to see you, Ninja.
Oh, hey, Ninja.
Um, Yeah, so the movie starts off where we got these two soldiers. One of them's taking a nap, and that's Schofield, and then the other soldier is named Baker. I want to say was his name Tom Baker
Was it Blake?
or Blake. Yeah, I was thinking
You're
like, oh,
thinking of a Doctor Who. Yeah.
I'm thinking of Doctor Who. Yeah, that's why I'm like, was his name Tom Baker? Because like that's the same as the guy who played Doctor Who.
Uh, Also, just a quick thing. I think early on we're just going to say spoiler alert.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
the non-spoiler thoughts are this movie is on Netflix. It's definitely worth a watch if you're interested in the time period. It's also
mhm.
just a very well shot movie, very intense, very hard to watch at certain points. So this is not a feel good movie at all,
No, it
remotely.
isn't. No, yeah. Yeah, it was directed by Sam Mendes, who directed uh, Skyfall and Spectre in the two middle Daniel Craig James Bond movies. And it's It might look like it was filmed in one continuous shot, but it wasn't.
right? That's the trick of the movie is that, especially in the first half, it's shot so that it tricks you into thinking it was just shot in one go.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, the cuts are all are like, like if the camera goes behind a wall or a pillar, or or
Right.
yeah.
And I
And
I couldn't really spot any of them. I
uh,
was like, once I realized what they were doing, I was on the lookout for it, but they hit it well.
no, they did, yeah. And Mendez did a similar the same trick at the beginning of Spectre, during the Day of the Dead parade. So if you watch like the first like 3 or 4 minutes of Spectre, he does the same thing there. But yeah, and it's of course, yeah, like I said, it's a World War I movie, so it's very, as you would expect, a very harsh, harsh, violent movie because it's a war movie. But yeah, uh, it's not like Saving Private Ryan like level, but it's certainly in that realm.
Yeah. So okay, so now we're going to get into spoiling the heck out of this movie.
Yes,
Uh, so one thing I really liked in the opening was when you had Schofield, who's just called Show for short. Uh,
so I feel like, yeah,
uh, um, when he's taking a nap, you see this beautiful, pristine field behind him,
mhm,
and it's like you're just transitioning from normal life, and then he goes into the trenches, and you just see the signs of the battle. Like there's injured people. I want to say there's a couple of bodies around.
yeah.
I forget if there were bodies in that opening scene, but it's like it's very gray, probably because there's so much dust in the air from the continuous bombardment. So you definitely get like it's definitely a very sudden transition into what the life of the war is like.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, we got Blake and Schofield or Show. They go into they get called into a trench because they're talking to this big general who's so one of the things about this movie is that there are some like big name actors in the movie, but they all have very small roles in there.
Right? I mean, Colin Firth's in it.
Uh,
Uh,
Benedict Cumberbatch,
Gesundheit.
Mark Strong, the guy who played Moriarty in the Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes series. Um, yeah, so they get these orders from their general because one of their battalions is about to get wiped out by the Germans because the Germans are uh, basically playing possum. Uh,
They've
yeah,
done a strategic withdrawal and cut the lines of communication to the new front that they've established in the hopes of baiting in a British attack.
right. Yeah, and we learned that Blake's brother is in that battalion, and so Blake has to. So they basically order Blake and Schofield to take the orders to the colonel who's in command of the battalion. That's Cumberbatch.
Right. And he's
And
very much aggressive, fight, 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 end this thing as soon as possible.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Damn the consequences.
yeah, and so Blake's really motivated because he's got to get there before his brother is potentially killed, and Show is basically just he kind of gets a little mad at Blake because he basically volunteered him for this to go with him, and he's just like
Right. This awful mission.
yeah, this awful mission where they have to go
They,
across.
they, like,
Yeah,
they have I would say that Blake and Show have this classic, like, I guess I'll call it like it's like a constant duality I see in things that are British related, where you'll have like it's almost like the character archetypes from Hot Fuzz, where you have the more serious, thin, gaunt guy, and the fat, well-meaning guy who's a little bit befuddled by life.
yeah,
And they just have an immediate chemistry between them, where it's like you get the sense that they're both friends, but like they aren't afraid to be irritated at each other.
right, yeah, and So they're going through this this battlefield and going into this German area, and they you pointed this out during the movie, or as they're going through there, they're crawling, getting around this barbed wire, and Show cuts his hand on the barbed wire, and you rightfully pointed out that, I mean, first of all, there are a lot of bacteria in barbed wire, and
Right.
yeah, and so at the very least, he would probably get a staph infection from that.
Right. And then on top of that, so they make him a rough bandage with some cloth that they had. I forget
Yeah.
where the cloth came from, but I almost want to say they cut off part of one of their shirts.
No, I think it was in his pack. I think he had
Okay,
a
maybe it was an actual bandage.
yeah.
But so then they're climbing over this what was no man's land before the Germans retreated, and it's like you realize that these pits and mud holes that they're going through, these were carved by artillery blasts. These are not naturally occurring depressions. They're just, so much artillery was shot that, um, like just as a statistic I heard, uh, there were some battles in the First World War where more artillery and cannons were fired than in the entirety of the American Civil War from start to end in one day.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's just like there's just these big rats all over the place. There's corpses all around,
Yeah.
and adding to my, what I was expect, what when as they're climbing down at one point, Show's hand ends up going through the rib cage of a dead German soldier, and this is
Yeah.
the hand that had been cut open.
Yeah.
So, the expectation that was planted in my head was, oh, I see how this is going to go. Like Show's going to die at some point because he's got to have like a raging infection now because this is
Yeah.
pre-antibiotics, so he's gonna have, they're gonna have to like cut his arm off or something like that.
Yeah.
They didn't really, and of course the whole movie he's using that hand constantly when he's having to fight or climb or
Yeah.
crawl. It never comes up.
No, 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 it doesn't. Yeah, it kind of gets forgotten. It gets forgotten pretty quickly. Um,
I would call that like it's like the main flaw of the movie. The only reason I'm giving a little bit of credit is that at the end of it, he talks about it's dedicated in such a way that you get the feeling that Sam had heard stories from either his father or his grandfather, or
it
no,
was his
grandfather or
grandfather.
great grandfather, excuse me.
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe like it's one of those things where, well, if it actually happened that way, then who are we to disagree?
Right.
But
Yeah.
it kind of just strained credulity a bit that that hand was still like wasn't twice its size and inflamed at the end of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Uh, yeah.
but what actually happens is horrifying enough because they get to the German trenches, and from what I know of the World Wars, I really appreciate the attention to detail. The British trenches were designed on the assumption that, oh well, the war is going to be over by Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
so
Blake
they
even
were
says that. Yeah.
and so it's just like it's just very
Minimal. Yeah.
very minimal dirt ground. Um, the ramparts are just planks that have been tilted at an angle to hold up the dirt or the earthworks.
Yeah.
Everything is very piecemeal. You,
Yeah.
you get to the German trenches and just orderly rows of sandbags, paved ground
Yeah.
in the trench. Like they were designed, they had intended to dig in and just stay dug in.
Yeah. They were in it for the long haul. Yeah. And Ninja says Sam's grandfather was a runner, like the main character. Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they identified the character as like Grandpa Mendes or something like that. So
yeah.
that could have been a great grandfather or something. I'm not sure how old Sam is.
I think he's in his 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But
So
yeah, yeah.
so then continuing the series of unfortunate events, they're they're in this dormitory that's inside it. Like basically this underground dormitory,
Hmm.
and they find a tripwire, and everything looks good until one of the fat German rats sets it off. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, well, this is where Show dies. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it
Yeah.
was not, in fact, where Show died. But like,
Nope.
oh. Like his eyes are so full of dust he can't see, and Blake has to. Man, like those were some intense scenes. Just
Yeah,
back on it.
the scene in the trench as it's falling apart. Yeah, that was tense. Yeah, yeah, I was fully expecting Show to die in there. Yeah, because he couldn't see anything, and there's even a part where he had to jump over a chasm, basically.
Yeah, right as this bunker is collapsing around them,
Yeah.
but they managed to get out, and you get some actual countryside there,
Hmm.
and you get some actual countryside there, and they find this barn, and it looks like everything's okay because there's a cow there. The farmers before he left had milked the cow, and
Yeah.
they filled their canteen with milk, and everything's good. And oh, and off in the distance, you can see a couple of British fighters dog fighting with a German fighter,
Yeah, and then the German fighter gets shot down and crashes into the barn.
lighting on a fire and almost running over our heroes.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought it was interesting just how like realistically it was shot because you don't like whenever you see a dogfight in a movie, you're always like switching like you're always like in the fighter perspective or you're switching around. You have a very tight view of it.
Yeah.
It looks very different and almost like almost disconnected watching a dogfight from a ground perspective because it just looks like they're kind of drifting along lazily.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, because because of course with the way that they filmed it, it had to be from the ground. They couldn't, yeah, you couldn't make those cuts in there like that. And but yeah, it did kind of look a little. I wonder if those planes were CGI.
It's possible, but I more I didn't I more took it to be like, well, I guess yeah, that's what it would basically look like if you're watching guys dogfighting on slow biplanes.
No, yeah, yeah, and then you go from like, that's, oh wow, the plane got shot down. Oh no, it's
Oh
coming right
crap,
at
all
us.
drifting this way.
Yeah,
And then, showing a moment of humanity, they pull the German fighter pilot out of the burning plane,
yeah,
and this rat bastard stabs Blake in the stomach.
yeah. Um, very shocking moment. And yeah, of course I'm watching. I'm sitting there going like, okay, well, maybe he's, maybe it's not that bad, and
Right.
they'll patch him up. But then I started seeing the color draining from his face. I went, oh
Yeah. That was some good makeup work.
yeah, yeah, and and sadly, Blake then doesn't make it, and then he gives Show the orders, and then and Show takes Blake's rings because just in case he or probably to send it to his family, or
Yeah.
give it to his brother. um but yeah, it was just like, oh man, like you're not expecting that. You're kind of expecting the opposite to happen.
Right. It seemed more like well, I guess it's almost it's like in Saving Private Ryan, Ryan was the one to survive when he was like the more wide-eyed innocent one in comparison.
Yeah, yeah,
When instead, it was the more cynical one who made it through. So at that point, Schofield, who is played by George McKay, has to carry the whole movie on his shoulders.
hmm,
And I was kind of initially worried about that, but he's good at a bunch of silent acting that he has to do for the rest of it when he doesn't have someone to bounce off of.
right, yeah. Yeah, the only time he ever bounces, the only time that ever happens is like if he's talking to other, like when he gets picked up by the other British soldiers, and then
Right.
he finds he takes shelter in a house, and there's a young French woman in there caring for a war orphan baby, and
Yeah. Oh yeah. So the second time when I felt like, okay, this is where they're really hammering in that Show is going to get a horrible infection in his hand.
yeah,
Because he gets picked up by another British group. Now it's like, of course, the other soldiers show up as soon as Blake is dead, but it's like they couldn't have really done anything to help him anyway, as deep as that stab wound was.
yeah, yeah,
But uh, so their truck gets stuck. He put, they're pushing along, and Show ends up falling into the muck up to like his shoulder practically, uh,
yeah,
and only on the injured arm, not on the good arm. So it's like, okay, this is where they're really working a lot of muck into there. Nope, not happening.
No, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Chekhov's gun remains firmly above the mantle.
yeah, yes, yeah, yeah, and then there's the whole yeah, and also too like he's always going in water too. He'll
Yeah,
yeah he ends up like in a river, and I'm telling you, that river that water is not clean water.
no, especially with probably a whole division's worth of Germans upstream from it.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, so he ends up going with these guys for a bit, but he ends up separating with them when their paths diverge.
yeah.
Uh, which I think to myself, I almost wonder if realistically the other commander would have put a couple of his guys to help out this now solo messenger, but that would have made things too easy for poor Show. Because
Yeah,
this
yeah,
movie is basically how can we make Show miserable moment to moment?
yeah. What's
Because
yeah,
well, yeah, he ends up yeah, has to cross a river under fire from a German, and this German hits him in his helmet at the same time he kills the German, so he falls down the steps and is knocked out and has a bloody back of his head,
yeah, yeah,
which is like I kept thinking to myself, okay, if this movie is basically happening in real time, they have loads of spare time right now to get there by morning. How is this going to happen?
yeah, yeah. And he got knocked out for probably like 3 or 4 hours at least.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it was nighttime, and to go back to the excellence of the directing, they're in this bombed out French villa or French Belgian,
yeah, French Belgian, yeah,
somewhere like that, and I, so the intensity of the little skirmishes he has to have, you see like the artillery barrages lighting the sky, and just like
mm,
how well they handled the flashes of light that he had to work with temporarily, and
mm.
it was again it was horrifying because if you play go back to a Warcraft for a moment there, if you're just playing an RTS and you order a artillery barrage on a quadrant, you don't really think about what it looks like from the perspective of somebody in there.
Right, yeah, yeah, or the part when he's the kind of like in a square kind of thing,
Hmm.
and then he sees a German soldier off in the distance, and the camera's behind him, and you see that soldier running right at him.
Yeah.
That
Eh,
was like,
yeah, like they just were occasionally getting a pillar between them, and the soldier kept just missing.
yeah,
Uh, they do an excellent job ramping up the tension. And we keep
mm,
using that word tension. I think that's the overall feeling of this movie is just constant tension.
yeah, yeah, because there's he's constantly under threat, which makes sense given the setting that he's in. It's just
Yep.
yeah, and I think the part that I think what got me more than anything about this movie was just all of the dead bodies that were everywhere. It was just
Yeah.
there. I mean, everywhere he went, there were just dead bodies, and it's just
Yeah.
which that's how it was, and in that war, it was just they were everywhere, and especially like mentioned in the river, when he's getting shot at so much, and then he has to jump in the river, and he has to climb over these dead bodies to get out, and it's just like,
Yeah. Ugh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So, and he has a scene like we mentioned where he ends up having to give up the milk he had saved for himself to this French woman to feed her child, and he
yeah,
has like this moment of I guess the last temptation of Schofield, where it's like you can just set your mission aside and hang out with this cute French girl who likes you,
yeah, yeah.
or at the very least enjoys having you around because you can protect her a bit.
Well, but there's a reason he didn't, though. When we get to the end of the movie, yeah, because well, I don't know if I want to jump that far ahead, but because you do find out that he has a wife and kid back in England.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah, so
But it is still the temptation is there
that's true. That's
to just
true.
like relax and hide out.
Yes, yeah, that's true. But
But
yeah,
and see, I guess I just had been kind of overwhelmed at that scene, and I hadn't realized that was his wife and kid. I thought that was just like generically his family or something.
mm, yeah,
But anyway, so and then he finally uh, there's a scene where he shows up with he comes across the battalion he was looking for finally,
yeah,
and they're just all sitting around there as like it's like they have the one guy in the platoon who can sing, like singing to them before they go off to die.
Yeah.
Movie's
Yeah.
not afraid to have some quiet moments like that.
Yeah. 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 And he's leaning. Yeah. And he's leaning up against a tree, and he's just exhausted.
Just done.
Yeah.
Eh, And yeah, so ultimately, and you get a scene where he's on the edges of a fight that's happening, as soldiers are already being sent up, and he's desperately trying to get to Doctor Strange,
Yeah.
aka the Major or
Yeah.
the Captain or whatever he was,
Yeah.
and he has to run into the battlefield for a moment.
Yeah.
Well, did you notice that? Like, so he actually ran into a couple of people who
Mhm.
didn't notice he was there.
Yeah.
You notice that like most of them got up, but one guy just stayed laying down and motionless. Like, oh, I guess he knocked him out. Oops.
Yeah.
um, and he gets there, and mission is accomplished, but there's no real sense of satisfaction because, sure, like he kept that battalion from running into that gauntlet, but
Yeah.
that they're gonna have to go in there eventually, just with
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, yeah, Cumberbatch even says that. He's like, "Oh yeah, well they're I'm being ordered to stand down now, but then tomorrow I'm going to be ordered to attack." It's
Right, because the general almost was trying to portray Cumberbatch's character as being irrationally battle thirsty, but it's like it's going to happen one way or the other. Might as well get it over with and try to catch Jerry with his pants down.
right. Yeah. And yeah, he stands them down, and then Show actually does find Blake's brother, and it's I don't remember the actor's name, but he was actually in the Eternals, so there's another Marvel
Oh
connection
no!
there. He was the villain in Eternals.
Oh no!
Yeah,
He did kind of look like the dead Blake at that point, which I thought was a nice touch that they cast somebody who you could believably see as someone's brother.
yeah, yeah, and well, Blake even tells him that. He says, "My brother looks like me, but older." Yeah,
Yeah. Uh, yeah, so he gives him his effects, and he sits down, refusing any medical care, and just looks at the pictures of his family, and the movie's over.
yeah,
And it's like, yeah, I mean, he accomplished his mission, but at what cost? And is it going to actually matter in the long run?
yeah. Which is the story of, I would say, both world wars. Is they do accomplish something. They'll accomplish a mission like that, but then you know did they actually, it wasn't meaningful? Did they
Yeah,
actually, yeah, it was it you know did, you know in the long run, is it is it going to mean anything? Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so I'll just say that my bias is usually towards I like happier movies usually,
Mhm.
but I feel weird saying I enjoyed that movie considering like the whole experience we just talked about was
Yeah.
kind of horrific, but it was just so well shot, and it definitely elicited the emotions it was supposed to elicit.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah. And yeah, I'd definitely recommend this movie for anybody, if even if you're not a World War I person, or war person. I mean, I think it's definitely worth a watch. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I would say is that it feels very realistic. The only plot armor that show really had outside of a few bits of luck was not having a raging staph infection. And I would love to talk with Sam and wonder and ask, like, did you consider that? Like that because
Yeah.
you kept perfectly setting up a horrific infection that never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe one day. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah.
Definitely ending on the stronger movie this week. It occurs to
Yes.
me that the common element of all three of the things we discussed was uh, all three of them present a seemingly ceaseless back and forth between two sides,
Yes. Yeah.
and you can and all of them wonder if you actually made a difference in the end. So that's kind of funny when you think about it like that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, I would say 1917 is definitely the bigger piece of art.
Mhm.
Demon Slayer Mugen Train is definitely the more crowd pleasy one that um, has a happier view of the world, I would say.
Yeah.
And Warcraft exists.
It's just, well, that's a great way to end our a great place to end our reviews here.
Yep.